plan to kick off was to just go around the room. If you could share your name, what you're doing in food systems, area of work, and I am curious too if there were any either specifics from this morning's conversation or other breakouts you've been in that you want to talk through more, or just something else you'd like to bring into the space. Wanted to just create room for us to chat. So the rules again are name or department or you work with, and if there's any specific activity, whether that be like team or coalition efforts, strategic planning, those types of things, or anything else on your mind that we should chat through today. So that's our game plan. Can I start with you, Robin? I'm going to take some notes too while y'all are chatting.
My name is Robin Buttercup, and I'm with SDSU Extension as a horticulture field specialist. And so I do anything related to horticulture, plants, gardens, but I do more work with like home gardeners and community gardening rather than like with the commercial like specialty crop growers. But I really am interested in food systems, but from an ecological standpoint. So kind of my graduate work was with native plants, but prior to that I was interested in permaculture. So I'm kind of trying to kind of meld them all together into some sort of a concept where I can talk to people about how to grow food in your home, yard, or in your community in a way that's going to be ecologically beneficial, nutritious, supporting all of our pollinators. So kind of like putting it all together into more of an ecosystem.
I'm James Jennings, as of recently. I'm in the sustainability department at the University of South Dakota, getting my PhD there. And so I kind of have an anthropological humanities background, and we're looking at farmer families.
Hi, I'm Olivia Jennings, and I work at Ignitis Foundation, which is like a nonprofit regenerative agriculture research foundation, where we travel the country looking at how different management practices affects the ecological outcomes on farm and farm well-being, whether that's measured in economic terms or physical.
I'm Janelle Pearson. I work with Department of Education. I'm overseeing the formula grant, so farm to school, and so that's we're trying to obviously get more food into our federal meal nutrition programs. So I'm also on our farm to school core team. We did some strategic planning. I feel like we've hit kind of a wall there. We're a small group. There's been turnover. We need to expand the group. But then your comment this morning about, there's only so many people that have the passion that want to do some of this. And so you just end up burning them out. And so that's something I wouldn't mind talking about some. Also, I feel like trying to expand and build a stronger team is just super important, and we just haven't done that yet. And we've done a little, exercises on the wall, like who's missing, the 4 organizations that we've got, but who are we missing in here, and who do we need to invite? And then we were also just recently in Missoula, Montana for a conference on procurement and moving procurement forward in South Dakota. And we kind of came up with the idea to expand food hubs in the state, because we have all of one. And so trying to expand those, and then with the goal of having at least one school purchasing from each of those. And but there's transportation, there's just so much. The middle of the state is a desert for produce, and either end of the state has it, but not in the middle. So Yeah.
Hi, I'm Andrea Davis. I work at Western South Dakota Community Action in Aberdeen. So I manage a community garden there with low-income families. So we do gardening classes, and then just this last season we did our first series of food preservation and cooking in our community kitchen with what we grew.
Hi, Courtney. Sorry to miss your speech this morning. We had a big event at UNO yesterday with a food lunch and learn. So
Very cool.
yeah, we fed about 250 people native foods. Got to talk about its importance in today's society and relevance in our global atmosphere. Anthony Warrior, chef owner of Warrior's Palate Catering Consulting. I work for the Nebraska Indian Community College as a tribal college small business administration, so building local economies with cooperatives pretty much is what we're really pushing for right now. So this is kind of very relevant to us and finding those beginning and end results before. I also work with Dr. Christina Gish and Morgan and all the guys at Iowa State as a tribal liaison with their Three Sisters project. And Brandon was there, and before Brandon moved away, what a great guy. But we did a lot of work with Iowa State, still doing work with Iowa State and a lot of the major colleges here in the Midwest. So it's been quite a journey on what one little bug can do for us all and shake us all up. Try to start these conversations. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you as well. I'm going to miss your session tomorrow too. So we're just rotating through.
Reciprocal.
Courtney, can I add one other thing?
Please, yes.
The fact that we're so siloed.
Yeah.
So everybody in here is doing something and none of us know what each other is doing. And so how do we fix that? How do we, so that we're all working in the same direction and taking advantage of opportunities that we don't even know are there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm gonna show some images. I'd rather have just like a conversation, but I'm more of a visual learner, so, or like, that's how my brain works at least, so I'm gonna show some things if I can get it up quickly. I'm gonna go off of that actually first. So I might share, I think what I'm gonna do is pull up the presentation from this morning, but I might start with,
Here's a cord. I don't know if you need this.
just like flow in through.
I do want to have a conversation though. You guys are researching anthropology and
Yeah.
To that point, one of the practices that we use in both our local food leader and our resilient food system certification is trying to first like have this network discussion with folks in the room. And I know it's easier when we're like present, but it can also work virtually. So we've had some folks also try this like kind of a starting point of like who's doing what, how do we build that? So what we've done, and this is just food for thought, right? And we can take this wherever we want to go, is we have created this diagram into a networking poster. So essentially there's squares around the diagram in two spaces, one's with the community asset areas and then one's with those food system sectors. And so I have folks, we do this two ways. One is a round robin, so I do essentially what we just did, but I'm first gonna ask you like, what community asset area do you work in most? So maybe it's economy and finance, or perhaps you're working with education and you're gonna be in the knowledge and wisdom space, or maybe it's really working on like cultural relevance, dignity, and involvement for different types of audiences. And so what we would do as facilitators is write those up. And then internally, we would do the same thing. We do another round robin for the food system sectors. So who's working in like gardens or food access, donation programs? maybe it's processing or transformation, and we're looking at value added, perhaps it's food hubs or something like that. Purchasing, or again, that conservation side. So what ends up being really helpful is we have these squares, and then we have this visual representation of names on the board, and we can start to see two things. One, where there's a lot of saturation in our work, but also where there's gaps. And so predominantly, as we've done that across the nation, processing is really low. That's like one of the main things we see. And I would say conservation to some extent, depending on the values of the group or community we're in, is low. And then when we get into the asset areas, I would say a lot of our saturation is in education. We have a lot of folks working in that. Also, it probably like culture and wellness and dignity and involvement, although that's shifting a little bit in the last couple of years. We tend to be low on folks participating from a governance and policy standpoint, unless we have like city or COGS or tribal entities like very much working on those efforts. And then the natural and built environments tend to be our other like lower gap areas. So we don't have as many of those like city zoning, built infrastructure architects, like construction, those folks that are like doing that action, always present in our spaces. So we first do that. You get this like visual representation of like who's who in the room, what we look like as a group, as just kind of a snapshot. And then before a break, we hand out these local food leader cards. And it basically is write down names of people who you know that are doing this work, but also who you think of as like a champion in this space. And then you also write down their asset or sector. We take those home and then we populate the map again. And then we're able to show a handful of different things the next time we look at it. So for our certification, it's the next morning, but you could do it pretty fast if you wanted to. So what I look at for those cards is I make a little game, and I first look at who's showing up more than once. And you can also name people in the room. So maybe Robin gets named by 4 people. Maybe Anthony gets named by a handful too. So I'm gonna change your color of your name to something else. So let's say I put everything in blue the first time, your names become red. I'm looking at that as someone who's trusted in the space. You have more bonding capital because you know folks, people are naming you, you're trusted. The other thing we do is that I use a green marker, let's say for everyone else that's listed in that network. And those are people who are still like bridged in this space. They're still known, they're still seen as like a high partner. They're not in the room, but we've identified them as a leader. So now I've got a red, a green, and a blue color up on my poster. But we start to see even more than saturation, who we know, who's doing what. And I can pull up a poster too, if that would be helpful as we work through this. But back to what you were sharing about a question of like silos, or maybe where we really need to either emphasize and leverage, or where we maybe need to find additional capacity for or effort. That's been something that's been helpful for us. What becomes tricky is that processing is still really low, but we know we need a processing facility, a shared use kitchen, something like that. We still have to figure out a way of coming together as a community. So then I would say in our process, that becomes our role if we're working with the community. So I'm gonna back up and express that statement for a second. So typically, our role when we're facilitating those conversations is either as a teacher of the process, or we're consulting with the group for a longer period of time. So I'm gonna work with you for 2 years. This is our agreement. If we have a project like a processing facility come up, it's our role to investigate that if there's not other champions in the room that have that time or capacity. So that gets to the question earlier this morning too about feasibility that someone asked around like, okay, when do you know if it's not gonna work? Mm-hmm. So Meg and I, in this example, would take on that charge of a processing facility. We would try to do some sort of analysis, feasibility study, whether that's market research or it's site development or it's what already exists, who else is already doing this that we can partner with. That would be our role in our process that we work through. With the hope that we identify folks that are either currently in that space and bring them into our group, or that we can identify new opportunities and how to leverage those things. So that might turn into a grant application, a different design element. So I'll pause there and see if there's any like questions, comments, feedback, either both on like how this is used for identification or the general process. process that we've created too.
So we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
And so if I was gonna go out and study food hubs, I know nothing about a food hub. So how would I go about checking the feasibility of something like that? I mean, or is that or is that where you have to hire a consultant? Or, what does that, yeah.
Yeah, so a couple ideas to that specific example of food hubs. One, Iowa has 10 now, so we have a food hub working group, so like would love to connect you with those folks. They are brilliant. They have created I think we started our first one, 2009, 2011. And now the Food Hub Managers Working Group has kind of evolved, especially in COVID. Folks started meeting monthly, maybe weekly then. I share that because for a time, they met just as business, as the managers of those food hubs. It was really an internal group, so they could share like finance challenges or successes, like all the dirty, nitty gritty, no one else wants to know about except for those managers. They had those meetings. But there's a handful of also different business models that exist too. So we have nonprofits, we have for-profits, we have co-ops, there's a plethora. And they each have then different, I can go through my school internet, I'll show you a map. Let's see if I can get this.
They also vary by like direct to consumer versus wholesale.
Yeah, so some are doing, do you want to elaborate?
I feel like you know more.
I don't want to step on toes. Yeah, so to Meg's point, some are doing more like a cooperative model. So there's like a retail store. Folks may, like farmers, producers may say like, these are the products I have available. I'm gonna put them up on the online store. Whatever is purchased, I'm gonna bring to the Iowa Food Co-op on Tuesday, that it then can get picked up on Thursday. They also, for that example, had different drop-off sites. So one of our like quick win strategies in a community was getting a new community on board with that co-op, and then those boxes were distributed through a library. And it was like their biggest community in terms of sales for a year or so, if I remember correctly. So that's one model. We also have models that are specifically farm to school, farm to institution, and they're doing more wholesale aggregation and distribution. We have others that are maybe not only local, they're also doing organic, so they have additional markets so they can operate year round. So in that case, it's more of a door-to-door delivery. They are starting to also kind of a hybrid model of some wholesale distribution, but also direct-to-consumer distribution too. So in that case, I, as an individual consumer, can get on, place my order for the week, the box gets dropped off. But then as a school or as a grocery, I can also make my order and get that weekly too. And that was trialed more, I would say, for that particular hub. They're called Prudent Produce, through the Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure Grant and the LFPA, LFS, which obviously just got canceled. So there was some really amazing things getting tested that got shut down. How was I getting on here? Food hubs. Yeah.
There's also a section of resources on food hubs.
Mhm.
So that could be helpful.
Yes, exactly. So this is our food. You're not seeing any of this. That's really great. There we go. Okay. So this is our Food Hub Managers Working Group. Iowa State, we used to help facilitate those. It is now coordinated through other organizations now. We have Teresa, who's like an amazing technical expertise. So she's there. These are some of the impact stories we had. This is what I wanted. What we do build capacity for is some of the like network support and then the evaluation. So here you can see our networks, and this isn't all of the food hubs, but on the right is most that have been active. The colors are their geography that they would serve. The nodes that you see is a new project that we've been trying to look at different storage practices. So maybe you don't need a site for actual like retail sales, but you're gonna have shared cold, dry, refrigerated storage. So that's being tested right now. The circles are where within that area, the small circles are where they're actually located. So for example, the yellow and the bright blue, they're really close to central Iowa, Des Moines area. But they have very different business models, so they collaborate. The darker blue, like swamp that you see come through is farm table delivery. They use a cross-stocking opportunity quite a bit, especially with dairy and a few others to these different regions. And right now in that purple, that field to family, it's been a little bit since I've been in those meetings, but they're trying to figure out how this like southern region can get up to that northern region in terms of product distribution. To go down that, please.
Can confirm about like the trying to get products moved up more in our last food systems, like all Iowa State food systems related specialists and staff. Teresa actually shared that they're working still, like devastating the loss of like LFS and LFPA, but they're still working on the Hub to Hub project, which is where like they're able to sell from hub to hub to fulfill like institutional orders that are quite big and they can't really handle it.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to share too is we touch a lot of different states. So the other thing that comes into play here too is when we're talking about either different food safety or certifications that are needed in regards to if you can sell into Wisconsin or Minnesota or whatever it may be. And so I think that's been the other nice thing about having that working group is they can troubleshoot together. We're fortunate to have, for example, some state meat processing, which not all states have, but that means it can't go across federal, state boundaries. But then we look at how FSMA or some of those food safety trainings might support those producers and new market options.
There was also a article on this, because I happened to look at this, and there was an article on food hubs as well, and it's a fabulous article. I learned so much.
Good.
And came up with questions like if we only decide to have one school that's buying from that food hub, is that going to be enough?
Yeah.
So, so thanks to the paper for that, because that,
They've done a lot of really strong research, and this has been one area too where there's been great collaboration, I would say, with some of our supply chain faculty, looking at those types of issues from an economic feasibility space too, but also logistics and like, what's my distribution route? What makes the most sense? We're going through a similar process right now, or wrapping up, I should say. We have no fruit and veg processor in Iowa. So if we wanted to do anything beyond like a shared use kitchen or direct to consumer product, it does not exist currently. So we're working with a handful of folks to understand those logistics, farmer, school, like different buyer interests, but how product flows and where things go is like super tricky. So a different form of collab and team development.
thank you.
Yeah. And
Were you going to say something a little bit ago?
Yeah, I just want to touch base on the silos. And, in the 80s and 90s was a big push for food sovereignty with a lot of states and area. And, in the early 2000s when we had kind of the financial crash, people were really trying to figure out where their food systems were going to sustain. And the government puts out a lot of money. They put out all this money to fund our programs and our positions. But when that money runs out, then so do the efforts, and we get left to have to start over and over again. And creating a handbook or a pathway has kind of been the notion of these groups working together, that when it's time to rebuild, when the money comes back, or finding grants or funders to do this work again, that we don't have to keep recreating. Just this last year, we lost a major contributor to the food system, and that was the head of the USDA. When she was dead, we lost all of our relationship, and we had to start over. That was 5 years of build, and now we have to do it again. So it's cyclical; it keeps happening over and over and over. But the food hub, it's a really great thing, because the regulations, policies of what you said is really light in these communities. Has to create these policies that are favorable of this, and we're still at a disadvantage of these processes. And hopefully we get through that. But I was going to say, because I see you reaching over in a little bit at Wisconsin on one of those, but Eric, his group, and Center for Great Plains, they got a new hub they're building, they just bought in Iowa City. And we're looking for, they want me to come over and build a processing center to take all this food and process it to get it out to schools and get it out to health systems.
Yeah.
But we need the non-profits, we need the sectors, we need the policies to be built. And you have tribes and you have Meskwakis. And if we can go up tribal policy, do like the Iowas of Kansas did, was to build an international trade zone where they have their own shipping, they have their own ability to import fish from Canada and wild rices and stuff to be able to do this work. That would be the dream of getting the state to say, we recognize your international trade zone. So, but we have all these people thinking on these terms, but unfortunately, when their funding runs out, that position's gone, and then that person has to, eliminate everything that they worked on. And then we have to build new silos again. So
that's so
those
true.
are challenges, and I always want to tie in with the challenges.
Absolutely, and I think you bring up too, we were talking a little bit about like diverse funding streams. So when that person's initial primary foundational funding goes, we still have a backlog of different projects or things that maybe folks, that's one piece that like my previous boss had taught me, which is not always, I realize, like an ability to do, but so far we've been able to have like 2 years of funding like in the pocket, we're ready to go. So if a grant goes away, I can pivot Megan's work to something else. Not that that's always best, depending on expertise, but it gives a little bit more sustainability for those.
Create a new name for the position.
Yeah. Or like you can know about farmers markets or food hubs or labor, like all these different things. So if you have to go into another spot, and that's at a small scale, right? Not the federal level that you're talking about. But it made me think of how we stay nimble in this space to continue to do hard work when things are.
So these certifications that you're talking about, right? When you go work with these different people, is it just in the state of Iowa, or are you guys national?
We're nationally.
Okay.
Yep. So I would say we do kind of 3 different things. Our food systems team, we have certifications, which we teach nationally. That's local food leader and then resilient community food systems. Local food leader is like a 2-day, it's really like a beginner. What is happening in a food system? How do you facilitate conversations? Who's who? And then we go through the basics like creating a plan of work and how to evaluate success. Our resilient community food systems program is more about how to strategically plan, develop, operate in a food system, and it has some emergency management techniques in there, so foresight focus groups, tabletop exercises, and then we pull in design thinking, strategic doing, and collective impact to get to a vision, mission, values, and then some project implementation. So that's a 3-day training. But we also do that as a process in communities. So a lot of our work is like contracts with different folks. So we've been working in Dakota County, Colorado, Northeast Kingdom, Vermont, Greensville, South Carolina, and could rattle off a few more, but it's just more based on like how we can build capacity too. So dependent on needs, we may be more of like a technical assistance for like food hub feasibility. A lot of times our work, Meg and I's at least, is more on the facilitation process and research side, figuring out like what's needed, who are the partners maybe not in the room, how do we collectively organize, determining our action plan, and then trying to get into those next steps for engagement, so some quick wins and long-term development. So that's one phase, one piece is those certs and like fee-for-service processes where that would sit for us. We do a lot of pharmaceutical and early care work in state, so that would be statewide. And then our agricultural marketing resource center is another element of our goal. So AgMark is funded through USDA, value-added producer grants. Predominantly this website is just that, it's research, tools, resources for farms, food businesses. Since I started as the director for the last few years, we've kind of evolved our food system side, so you can learn more about those things. But I wanted to pull up a few of the questions that are coming up. So we do collaborate with different states, different universities, different nonprofits. That's been a very large goal, is to kind of mix up what we've been up to. We've had the center for about 25 years, so we're always looking for new collaboration. So this is a supply chain series. Our partners at University of Minnesota developed these videos, so this might be a space in the food hub that would be of interest. We have a food hub site too on here. Basically, our role is listening to farmers and food businesses on what would be supportive for you in a value-added space. And then we either internally or with collaborators externally do research and programming around that. This has included grocery, so there is a grocery toolkit. This includes some profit simulator and modules, as well as we'll have a community economic impact report out about independent grocery stores. What am I missing? Some food as medicine work. We did a case study nationally on food as medicine, specifically with an indigenous lens. I did just have to take that down, but it will get back up. But that is available.
Who was that?
We did that internally. I had a team member help, and then we did interviews with 15 different folks, and had a 4-part video series about food as medicine. In that regard, it's not like comprehensive. Eye Changes is another one that we've been networking with for food as medicine. And then Nourish out of Canada has done some really impressive leadership development there. Yeah. So many things are happening in that space, which I feel like is amazing. Here's our resilient food systems program. So here you can see more about our process and just reports, efforts. The big piece with this RFS process is we had funds to give to communities too. So after we did that action planning and process, communities could implement a program. So I feel like we kind of come full circle to we do so many funds to be able to do some practices. And so that's been a big goal of ours as we work with and partner, is how do we have funds for nonprofits, businesses, farmers to actually implement and have their own benefit to the work beyond research.
I see different areas where before you were hired by the Virgin Islands. You were, and you visited with their governments and their stakeholders and came to the table and developed plans.
Yeah, so the Virgin Islands is kind of a unique story for us. So yes, they were on here. In this case, they were built into my ACMAR scope, so we were able to pay them to do an implementation for resilience. Prior to that, we were built into several of their grants. FEMA had us do a deployment, and we developed a food systems action plan, a hurricane checklist. We hosted a local food leader and community food system certification down there. And then we, from all of that work, received a handful of other grants for extension risk management, some foundation projects. So we're able to actually move into implementation. When this project, what you're seeing here, was coming up, I was working on my dissertation, and AgMar through USDA, we received funds to work with 5 different communities nationwide to understand natural disaster and COVID impacts. So for Texas, Virgin Islands, Alaska, Iowa, and Arkansas, we worked in those spaces on specific natural events. And then they received, after the first phase of the process, they received, it was small, but they received $10,000 to do an implementation project. So Virgin Islands looked at actually a cooperative business. So they had, everything's coming back to food hubs today. They had these local food cooperatives in different direct market channels, retailers. They had started a co-op, I want to say 2016. It had closed. There was quite a big barrier with trust because there was misinformation and some financial issues in regards to how the business was developed and maintained. So we ended up funding a study essentially of like what would be needed to have that type of business operate again. And it was a lot of interviews, a lot of sit-down discussions. It was helpful to have a neutral partner there because it was a tricky situation. But they ended up looking then at a business cooperative model for a new food hub in the future. They were working on that also through a regional food business center. So we worked with them on the non-contiguous regional food business center, which was one of the 4 that just got funded this spring. So they're very close to having some business builder dollars and technical assistance that would have supported themselves.
I just showed up and I haven't been here all day, so I'm just
Welcome.
and so quickly,
Please.
I'm Pam Cole, and I'm with Press Break. We're a food recovery nonprofit in Sioux Falls, and we will have recovered 400,000 pounds of surplus food. It prevented that from going to waste this year. And we've been around for 14 years, and I started as executive director in January. And Robin and I go back many years in many different ways. I was wondering, in your studying of food systems, I grew up in a family farm in North Dakota, so I understand what our food system was growing up. I know that there's, how many different thousands of different, food systems. Our food, how we get food is a food system, I guess, right? What books, like why would you read a book to say what's all wrong? Because, right?
Where do we start?
But, yeah, I would love to know some titles of books, where we're going incredibly wrong in the United States, maybe the world, I don't know. Because food waste is equivalent to 2%, and that's after we've, grown all the produce, the animals, transported it, cooked it, $400 billion. So, when we have, the Argus has called me because they're wondering, okay, what are we seeing on the ground with the volunteers? We see double the amount of people in food lines right now, at food giveaways this week. We're in crisis mode. There were people in crisis mode. There's just now more people in crisis. But the question is, and I love to mock different models and how I'm sort of getting my brain around it quickly. But I'd love to read very current, what is wrong, top to bottom, with food systems.
There's so many different really good books. So the one that is just like coming to my mind is there's a Journal of Agriculture and Food Systems Development. It is a free public access journal. It is, I think, will cover a lot of different topics, some positives, some challenges. It crosscuts. So that's one that would just be something to look into.
Courtney, would you say that name?
Yeah.
Unlike Pam, I'm a reader.
Nice. The Journal of Agriculture and Food Systems Development. Food Systems Development, am I saying? I might be making it too short because it is a long name.
Something about alphabet soup acronyms.
But yeah, it does have community in there. There we go. FACID.
A book that's a little bit older, but there's a book called Rebuilding the Food Shed. So that one has shed, rebuilding the food shed. So it's just about like, how do you rebuild community and regional food systems?
Yeah, that one's good. I'm thinking of like Mark Whitney's really great. Closing the food. Yeah.
I was gonna say, were you on a panel with
Oh yeah. What your food ate. That's more in the regenerative ag space, but and so connection to soil, soil, food, and health, I would say, Ann and her husband.
David Montgomery.
Yes.
And they got some cool papers and.
Yeah, I got to do her interview at a coffee shop recently, and then present with her at a Women in Land conference a few weeks ago. She's great. She's brilliant. I will say her book is very dense. It is like very dense, very smart, very dense.
Well, then another question is, okay, what countries or states or areas have, other than the ones, the small ones that, or the ones that you've been working on, who's doing it better? Switzerland? Who, you know?
That's a really good question. What do others think? Who do you turn to?
When it comes to offering food, sustainable programs and being able to cater those needs, I think each country's perspective of their food is different, and that's what I'll kind of discuss tomorrow.
Okay.
Is when we talk about how do we think about food.
Yeah.
And just one reading to get back to a precursor to where we're at today is called "Ruin Their Crops on the Ground." If you've ever heard of that book, have you read that yet?
I have no idea.
What is it?
It's called "Ruin Their Crops on the Ground," and it's a precursor to why the United States today now uses its current policies and procedures.
Yeah.
And food being used as a hate crime
Yes.
towards populations kind of guides us in today's discussions of why we're still using policy.
Yeah.
So I'm not a reader, I'm a conversationalist. I'll sit there and I'll talk your ear off, and I'll learn as much as I can and apply it to real world application. But that's one of the books that was given to me because what I discussed is very much that kind of concept. So, but I think with states and countries that are revitalizing their food offerings, their perspectives are way different than each other. So I can't say who's doing it better, but when we turn it into utilizing it within the family units, Japan, China, Asia is huge with those markets. And at one time, America was very, very huge on that too, but now we've broken that away. And that'll kind of give you an understanding.
I think to your point too, like putting value on like what do we mean by like the good food system, and every place is different there too. And so I don't know, encourage figuring out what those values are that you or we think are important to what a food system is, and then finding those case studies based on that. Because I think we could go down like the economic, financial pathway, who's getting rich. We could go down the, I don't know, farmers have jobs and can pay for where they live. Like, I think there's just like so many different value systems that come into play. And when we've gotten into more of development projects and like through the process that I kind of described, when they turn into more of a development thing, those values become really important, because how are we deciding payment structures? Anyways, the list goes on, but I feel like that's become our biggest, that's why we start with developing vision, mission, and values when we're working in community, and they're always different. But thinking 7 generations ahead has been like our best, I found to be like our best question of figuring out what your values are long term. Because some people don't care, and others care really strongly about what the world looks like. So
I also want to implement that. Also, the United States is so diverse that each individual area, some are really doing really well within our confinement, so we can't talk as a whole. We have to break it down into region or groups, or like we would take hinted on. And we just can't leave it as what country is doing better, because half of China is a convenience area, and the rest, is local economies doing.
yeah, totally. And I think, so the question too of like, what do we mean by local? I think always has come up, like, what, are we talking 400 miles, are we talking a city, are we talking a state? And that gets really hard too when we think about systems, which I believe is what we've all kind of alluded to. Yes, that like goes across
Bananas
boundaries.
aren't local. But we all,
Exactly.
you decide.
And I think to that point, is the value local or is the value food? And then like, anyways, I think, and that's why we used to be our local food systems team, and we moved to food systems because banana is a great example. Like, banana is still part of our food system. It may not be the goal in every space, right? But eating is, people having access to food is. And so we brought our definition a little bit about.
We're focused on food waste prevention.
Yeah.
So that balance of seeing the extraordinary, absolute just waste And then knowing that so many people are hungry, it's just,
Well, we just had a victory, one of the actual states that now all food that's being, off the shelves has to go to. In your line of work, has anybody approached you about supplying that food for school systems?
no, not yet. In fact, internal foods, there's just so much food waste
Yeah.
internally with schools. We haven't focused on that yet, but have some ideas kind of, and questions about that as to how can they prevent internal food waste in a larger system like that, and utilize it for after-school programs potentially, and repackage it if they don't distribute it, if they don't put it in trays, and they're able to keep it. You know, I don't know what all the rules are with that
No, I
at
got
this
you.
moment right now,
It is.
but you're right, I mean, there's,
Okay.
So closing the food gap, I think you would be interested in that book.
okay.
It's old, but it's a good one. We did a study on, I'm just gonna see if it was still on here, with Lynn County on a food, it is still on there, look at that. So briefly, I won't take too much time. This was 5 years ago, but we were really charged with understanding food rescue in the county. And this was funded through the county planning department. Let me make sure I'm saying that correctly. Yeah, Lynn County Public Health, sorry. So what we did, they had a steering committee. We had a group that was convening to share, like, what do you mean by food access? What are we really wanting to understand? And it was both what you just described, like, where's food waste happening? And then also who needs access to food. So the way we approached it was we were looking at demographics and just like general secondary data, but we ended up doing interviews with food distributors, food banks, service providers, and individuals. We partnered with food banks in that case too, and pantries specifically. COVID-19 also happened during this, so like that's why there's a little disclaimer there. But I wanted to just describe, so with the food distributors, and in some cases that was a buyer as well. So it might be a school, it could be a retailer. We were first trying to understand like where they exist. I know this has to be so small on here, but like where they existed in regards to the county. We also then did a survey and some interviews with those folks to understand where they were distributing to and how much food waste they had. So this is looking at, again, those types of distributors then in this model. This was the survey responses, so you can see by types. We had retailers, caterers, schools, grocers, hospitals, cafeterias, and then by type how those ranked out in terms of who participated in this. And then we asked we kind of scrolled down. So what first was wasted? So that might include produce was the highest, followed by dairy, prepared meals, meats, grains, and others. And then frequency, we asked like monthly, weekly, daily, because it's all different, right? And so you can see, you can see weekly high, daily not so high, but still like fresh produce is going to waste pretty regularly, which is probably not a surprise to us. Then we also asked, how are you managing it? And you can see the top is trash. We are throwing those away because we also found out it takes a lot of time and effort to like donate food or even compost it, which kind of connects back to our whole food systems capacity piece in general. Like we might be passionate about it, but we need time to do that. So all in all, I'm going to skip through some of this, but we first asked the distributors about their food waste. We then asked about some food donation and the challenges they experienced and that if they wanted to. So challenges being staffing and volunteers, we don't have them basically. Policy regs, which we know are tricky. We do have an Iowa food donation tax law too, so you can get $5,000. I can look at the tax, but we do have a tax credit in Iowa, so there are opportunities, but there's still a lot of people who are worried about, thank you, yes, liability, logistics, funding, and other. The next thing we did is on the service provider side, so those pantries, food banks, food access organizations, we were asking, so what type of program do you have? And then what type of products are your clients requesting? And we did it 2 ways. We both asked like, what have you provided, requested, or received? So you can see in this case, they're currently providing high amounts of produce, meat, and non-perishables. The requested by your clients, the most requested are produce, non-perishables, followed by prepared meals, but those are probably the only ones that were about even. And then received through donation is this dark blue. So dark blue, we still get high non-perishables, high produce, and high prepared meals.
Where's this county? Lynn County?
Lynn County is in Iowa. Yep.
Towns?
Towns with, yep,
What's the population of the county? Maybe.
it is up here somewhere.
Some type of scientist.
Yeah, I'll tell you. And this is old figures, right? But so median household income of around 65,000. 9.4 poverty rate. I'm sure this might have gone up. You asked about population. I missed it. Oh yeah, there it is. 226. So. But yeah, so a little, I mean, again, this is an older report. But the thing that was fascinating to me is this like idea of what we are getting requested, what we're serving, and then what's wasted. And there's this like disconnect between even pantry, people who have pantries and what they're giving to someone based off of their expectation or assumption versus like knowing what people want to eat. So, and then you can also see on that side the products that are wasted. So overall, oh yeah, yep, it's on our food systems website. I'm buried deep in our previous research projects page, but here's the link up there. But it just, I think I wanted to just highlight it based on the food access space is a similar kind of feasibility study of process, and we really want people to be involved in the work we're doing and not just looking at a bunch of secondary data or numbers. And so the only other element I would add to that is there were mobile food pantries out, and so how we were asking clients what they wanted to have provided was through surveys that were anonymous that they could take when they were at those facilities as a way of getting their feedback.
So what did they do with this information?
So they created an action plan. In that report, you can see part of their goal was it was called Chow Bank. It was an application essentially that would like connect you to an Uber type driver. So if I had this event today and I have food left over, I can put in this application. I have 12 cans of chicken left. That goes into the app. They upload that, and then as a pantry or food bank, I can see that notification. I can say I want your 12 cans of chicken, and then you figure out the distribution point. Yeah.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, I'd be interested to use Food Rescue US.
Okay. There's so many models, right? Like I feel like apps are just like.
But yeah, that's what I did. But community assessment is, there's, because we sort of see if our parents do this, or we matchmake for food as best we can, and then different models might be regional people, because of transportation issues and timing issues.
The other thing I would say that we've seen in different counties on that point is even having like directories of what exists. And I hate making a printed directory, as Megan knows, because the second you print that sucker, it's out of date. And so, but there have been a handful of counties that have really looked into food access. And so having just a space to go to find like, where's a resource? I know right now too with SNAP being frozen, we had an emergency management call with our state volunteer organizations active in disaster on Monday about like what the heck are we gonna do in this space? And that was one thing that came up too, is like, okay, here's the platform for doing volunteers, like go here, what are your volunteer needs? We were talking about like the food needs, we haven't quite figured out who's tracking that. But that to me comes back to this whole kind of intent of session is like how how do we collaborate and like continue to work together so when an emergency happens or a crisis or we get all the dollars to do a project, we're like ready to jump in. And in that case, like a call was activated, we all jump on, we figure out different roles, and move forward. So. Are we doing time? Oh, we're like at time. 3 minutes. Any other, I know we went down a few rabbit holes. Were there any other like additional comments or questions about team development, coalitions, process strategies?
Honestly, in my situation, we kind of create these cohorts of farmers wherever we go, and we've been talking a lot about how to like they're facing so many issues, and we just provide like good science back to them, individualized for their farms, but like we get these farmers together and we do more of them, like more of the information that we have. Have you ever worked with like just, I guess, if you're just working purely with farmers who want to know what to do, I feel like you're kind of like starting at a different type of baseline because it's not very like, the stakeholders are not very diverse, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I guess like, have you ever had an experience with that?
Yeah, so what it reminds me of, and then open it up to others with different experience too. In Northeast Kingdom, Vermont, we started with our resilient food systems process, focused on farmers, food systems, impacts from flooding. So we worked in 3 different counties up there, but it was farmer focused. And so the process started with how farmers, in this case, dairy specialty crops, I would say predominantly, had been impacted by floods. And even in the tabletop exercise that we created, we focused on specialty crop farms. I had one group of specialty crops, one group of dairy, and then one group of distributors, basically, like my hubs. And so all of that to say, they gave us information about what they wanted to see, what they needed to see shift in the future. We did an action plan. They had chosen as a collective they initially wanted to do a resilient fund for farmers. And in that funding case, we had $22,500 to implement. They created we ended up working with MILFA, Organic Farming Association, Vermont, to facilitate 3 different sessions. I'd say it went a little different than expected, but it still worked. Their first one, they talked more about financing. So there was farmer education on different financing techniques, things to consider for having resilience or like an ocean bucket. I think I'm being recorded. You could take that out later. And so anyways, you get what I'm saying. There's money left over. And then, so that was thing 1. The second meeting was around, I think, cultural practices and environmental shifts that farmers were pivoting. And the third was around like, what do we want to do next? The other cool thing they did was they had it on farm sites. So, and they used the funds to pay farmers to be able to attend all 3, knowing that they were giving feedback on what this resilience fund could look like. And so we got to go back for the final one that was on a farm site. His farm had been flooded. And then he also talked about with climate changes, how they were shifting where their hoop house structure would go and the different types of production practices they were using. And then also he had I can't remember if it was a railway that went right through it or if it was just this other buffer, but he had a lower ground that he planted different products that would be more flood resistant versus what was happening on the higher ground level. So that was really lovely just to have that discussion. And then what we did at the final dinner was we shared, this was the implementation practice of this research. But then NOFA really tried to understand too, what do you want to see? Do you still want these meetings? I mean, it's a lot of time. We already paid to go. It's a little easier than if you're not. And our funding was ending. So they are anticipating still doing networking sessions for farmers. So that was one takeaway. They're also anticipating as an organization doing this process with other areas of the state, which was like a big win, I think, for us to know having that process was influential in keeping through things. So we're actually presenting with them in a couple weeks on that and have a farmer panel. So yeah, but that's what comes to mind. Do others have additional experiences with farmers in regards to collective action? Thought of another one. Yeah. So in Minnesota, I mentioned we're working with the National Guard and trying to have more sales through National Guard for farmers. And we're working with their soil water coalition. And so they've been awesome. I mean, they have their own built trusted network of so many different types of farmers and food businesses, value-added products. And so we were able to do a focus group just with their cohort to understand what are the products that seem like quick wins to you to get into an institution like a National Guard with very extreme food safety, I shouldn't say extreme, but like federal protocols for those sales, high liability insurance, those types of things. So that was a way of also getting farmer feedback, having kind of a point of contact with that coalition who can then share out with farmers who aren't able to maybe come to all those meetings, but there's still that trusted perspective. So.
What are these efforts? Do you currently have is there a legal team that helps these efforts?
In the National Guard space?
Actually, with Iowa State, or you guys have a person you go to, or?
For the legal side, we have a Center for Law and Tax. I'm saying it so wrong, but there is a legal group. We also have a small farms team, and through our Ag and Natural Resources Extension, they have a farm management team too. So yeah, when those questions come up, I send them over to someone else.
Okay, but what if we do call upon you to come do these work, you guys will have that access
That
to our
network.
resource?
Yeah, for sure. Or find, I think, local too, where it's appropriate. I think that's been one thing. When we work outside of the state, we try to find orgs locally as much as appropriate. And then I would say the Virgin Islands, as an example, with so lower capacity, that's part of why we've worked there so long, is even their extension and universities are so tapped that we are able to just bring in more support sometimes. So
Changes so quick.
yeah. Yes.
So when you talk about production, the inputs, you know, the farmers, the creation, that first initial, the produce or the animal product, just, that's where it all starts, right? How do you decide what you're gonna grow and how you're gonna grow it and what you're up against with large production that is, you know, mono egg or, you know, one. So is that, I mean, is it production based on what the markets want to buy? I mean, I'm being a devil advocate, sort of, but isn't that what we're really kind of up against? When you look at that changing food systems?
I think it depends. I'm curious if you have a
So I'll actually use the word.
if anyone has a thought, yeah.
But I think oftentimes so much of what farmers are growing is completely based on crop insurance. And what they
Oh,
see their
okay.
crop insurance for. And so
All right.
Yes, that's
Yeah, it's not based on the actual markets that they have.
Oh, wow, explain that more.
So often, so here in South Dakota, the easiest crop insurance to get is, and most of the proven ones are for corn and soy. And so if your crops fail, you know that you have baseline income each year. If you grow garlic, like my coworker, you might not be able to access any crop insurance at all.
Okay, why?
Because they don't consider certain practices or certain industries to be best practice, be like safe or desirable industry standard for your region.
I don't know.
A lot of
Buy-in,
the
right?
insurance too came from, I need Gary in this room to talk about like, so Farm Bill, came also from like storage crops. So they wanted a surplus so they could be stored. So if and when there was like crises back then, there was this storage available.
Okay.
My limited understanding of that is it just hasn't changed to now and like be influenced by the infrastructure and the systems we have now. That's a big piece of what you're saying with insurance, like how it got developed the way it is. But we have like very minimal insurance available for dairies or other specialty crops or small scale agriculture.
Way too risky to even try to grow anything else, because if it fails, you are
And then to that point, scale comes into place too, because so then if you're doing those high value products, a lot of folks are focused on the direct to consumer market because you get a high value for those sales versus going into buying more land, having more products, scaling up becomes tricky because we don't have the same price point once you go through the distribution system, get into that grocery store, school, have to meet the school meal regulations, like all of those become really complex, so.
So is there a movement nationwide to join together on insurance, or is that something that can be done
So,
as a different regulation?
well, I'll tell you the deep dark going down the rabbit holes is 48% of the economy is based upon insurance right now. What we get for our local funding, what we get coming out of our government comes from insurance sales, health, crop, anything that these insurance companies are promoting.
Is that
It's the moneymaker for us as the United States.
Okay.
That and healthcare is one of the biggest providers for this. A national movement would take all of us to be able to break those back down, and we attempted that a couple administrations ago, and we tried to regulate what insurance companies could do, but then when you found out that funding was cut for all these programs, nobody said anything anymore. So that drive is us as consumers relying upon that. My tweet the other day was to the state senator, I'm not gonna say who, but if SNAP is cut, tell them to go eat these piles of corn. I was just being mean, but in reality, that's the food source that feeds America. That's what I'm saying. So I left it at that. And I'm not trying to be militant, but I will tell you that economy is driving these efforts. The economy is driving why the farmers can't break out of the system. And we're going to continue to create this as long as we take the money. When we say, no, we're not going to use your money anymore, we're going to create our own, then we can make a movement. That's not happening. It's happening in micro areas, but it's not on a global scale. We rely too much on the sale of insurance.
It's precarious because, as you say, you have one bad crop or whatever.
Well, the other part of the food rescue is that 60% of the food that comes out of our growing fields doesn't even make it to the market. It goes back into waste.
Yeah.
So we don't even see that food, and our efforts, our money, and that's what the crop insurance is. It doesn't make it. So we're still paying, even though none of us even touch that food. So we got a broken system, but it works for the money. It works for the money. It's capitalistic views. So cooperatives are trying to break that view, but the view the other day in our entrepreneurship program was capitalism is broken. Capitalistic view is broken, but capitalism will not change. It's the driver. And so there's that double-edged sword. When we break it down holistically on the grassroots level, it's going to take the world to change, not just us, because we're global. We need unicorns.
That's fine, no, I'm here for that. Thank you so much. I know we're over time. I appreciate y'all. Thank you.